hero. You might say, that was before Zelensky. What about 2023? Well, nothing has changed. Zelensky continues to steal and deceive. Do you remember his words?
Our first task is a ceasefire in Donbass. I assure you, I'll do whatever it takes for our heroes to no longer die.
I haven't heard a word about the civilians of Donbass, and I'm sure neither of you. Zelensky was speaking about the militants of the so-called anti-terrorist operation. At that time, eastern Ukraine had been under shelling for 5 years, and that's why the words about peace were so eagerly awaited. I would like to remind you that in 2014, there was a coup d'etat called Maidan. Did it happen on its own, without anyone's help? I agree with you. There is no doubt. The opposition seized power with the support of various radical right-wing movements. The eastern and southern regions of the country stood against the new illegal government, but the resistance was brutally suppressed. On May 2nd, 2014, Ukrainian nationalists burned 48 people alive in the trade union's house in Odessa. At that time, Zelensky, a popular actor in Ukraine and Russia, had zero reaction. But the Odessa events became a point of no return for the country. Residents of Donbass decided to separate from Ukraine. In response, Kyiv declared its citizens as terrorists and launched an army against them. Over time, the civil war escalated into an armed conflict with Russia. However, all of this was preceded by extensive preparation and support from the United States and Western countries.
The United States has invested some $5 billion in Ukraine since 1991, when it became an independent state again after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And that money has been spent on supporting the aspirations of the Ukrainian people to have a strong democratic government that represents their interests.
As a result, destroyed cities, chaos, and the loss of life on both sides of the conflict. In our country, it's usual to blame everything on Russia. But what did President Volodymyr Zelensky do himself to prevent this horror? Firstly, he could have implemented the Minsk agreements. In September 2014, Russia, Ukraine, Germany, and France signed them. One of the critical conditions for peace was granting special status to Donbass. December 2019, a joint conference following the Normandy format meeting.
It is necessary, of course, to extend the agreement term on the special status of certain regions of Donbass, and ultimately make this norm permanent.
Here comes the moment for Zelensky to repay debt, for wealth, for coming to power. Just look at it. He doesn't even hide his smirk during the speech of Russian President Vladimir Putin. Apparently, he already knew that the Minsk agreements were just a screen, covering the preparations for a full-scale war between Ukraine and Russia. As for Russia and Donbass, they were deceived from the very beginning. Furthermore, both Zelensky and Petro Poroshenko were eager to join not only the European Union, but also NATO. And NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg has been promising to accept Ukraine for many years. Of course, this irritates and angers Russia. Who wants to have a constant military threat at their doorstep? As an American, I wouldn't be happy either. For example, with Chinese military bases on the Mexican border. But Russia is different. Let's turn Ukraine against it, arm it to the teeth, and sit it into battle. U.S. foreign policy expert James Jatras accurately assesses what is happening.
Our policy, however, is to weaken and destroy Russia. Now, for that purpose, yes, we are interested in Ukraine. Ukraine is a club we can beat the Russians with. It has nothing to do with Ukraine, nothing to do with Ukrainians who are simply expendable people as far as these governments are concerned.
But it seems like the authorities of Ukraine don't really care. Besides, President Zelensky and his team are adding fuel to the fire.
I am initiating consultations in the framework of the Budapest Memorandum. If they aren't held again, or their results don't guarantee security for our country, Ukraine will have every right to believe that the Budapest Memorandum is not working, and all the package decisions of 1994 are being questioned.
The Budapest Memorandum is an agreement under which Ukraine gave up nuclear weapons in exchange for security guarantees. In 1994, it was signed by Russia, the United States, Ukraine, and the United Kingdom. Ukraine had to agree because it didn't have the money to maintain a nuclear arsenal. And recent history has shown that the world is very lucky it turned out that way.
Even if we couldn't maintain them, we could reduce the nuclear capabilities instead, and we could use it to blackmail the entire world, and they would give us money for the maintenance.
Imagine that, a nuclear power that blackmails the whole world, demanding money. Would you like to have such a neighbor? I'm sure you wouldn't. No one would. The president of Ukraine practically declares his desire to regain nuclear weapons, and Russia initiates a special military operation. To bring it to this point, Ukraine had to be made an enemy of Russia, or anti-Russian.
The idea was to create a Nazi Ukraine, because only a Nazi Ukraine could fight against Russia. Only the Nazis. Any other type would never fight against Russia. So they needed to build a Nazi Ukraine.
After the collapse of the Soviet Union, Ukraine started saturating itself with nationalism. Yushchenko became the first Ukrainian president made by the West. Actually, not just a president. Even his personal life was America's achievement. I have to give credit to our system. We know what an excellent work is. Take a look in the 90s. A high-ranking employee of the U.S. State Department, Catherine Chumachenko, a native of Chicago and the daughter of Ukrainian immigrants, came to Kyiv for work. As a child, like many other children in the diaspora, she went through the scout camp Plast. I'll tell you more about that later. Then she became a member of the neo-Nazi organization National Alliance.
Initially, Yekaterina Chumachenko sought a husband among the executives who could really lead Ukraine. So Chumachenko asked Yushchenko's assistant, Rybachuk, to put her near Yushchenko on a plane heading from Kiev to Washington. 9 hours after the flight, he was absolutely in love, left his 2 children and wife, and went to Chumachenko as a banker.
At that moment, the flywheel started spinning with new force. Zelensky, under careful dictation, completes the bloody plan. Yushchenko was the first to make nationalism and Russophobia the ideology of Ukraine at the state level. In 2006, he rehabilitated the nationalist Ukrainian organization OUN-UPA, which executed Poles and Jews during the Second World War. In 2010, he bestowed the titles of Heroes of Ukraine upon fascist collaborators, Stepan Bandera and Roman Shukovich. He even threatened to expel the Russian Black Sea Fleet from Crimea. Essentially, Yushchenko severed ties with Russia, giving our country a blank check. Perhaps you'll ask me again if my imagination is playing tricks on me.
At the time, one of the offices in the SBU building was allocated to CIA personnel. There were even anecdotal cases when the U.S. ambassador, together with his entourage, handed out diplomas to the graduates of the SBU Academy. And there were the representatives of American intelligence agencies.
In 2010, Yushchenko lost the election to Viktor Yanukovych. The new president stripped Bandera and Shukovich of their hero titles and sought to restore relations with Russia. But turning Ukraine into an anti-Russian state was only a matter of time. Let's dig a little deeper.